Good morning. Oh, excellent. That's good. People got here early and had coffee. I'm so glad to see many of you here with us today to celebrate National Girls and Women in Sports Day. And I am absolutely delighted to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Nicole LaVoi. We are incredibly fortunate to have her with us from the University of Minnesota today. As the Associate Director of the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, Nicole stays in high demand, particularly at this time of year, celebrating National Girls and Women in Sport Day. So we jumped on the chance when I knew that she was going to be on sabbatical this spring to invite her to join us today. So we're thrilled to have Nicole with us. This year's national theme for National Girls and Women in Sports Day is Leading the Way, recognizing girls, student and professional athletes, coaches, administrators, and parents who are leading the way to inspire greatness in this generation and the next. And I can think of no better embodiment of this year's theme than Nicole. Her work, which she has asked me not to go on and on and on about, but you can read about her, demonstrates her absolute commitment to athletes, to girls and women, to coaches, to administrators, to parents, and to spectators of women's sports. Just an avid fan, an avid change maker, and an avid inspiration. So we're thrilled to have her with us. So Nicole does hold a PhD in kinesiology. Her specialty areas are sports psychology and sports sociology. And her research, though, cuts across all of the areas for folks who are here today, from exercise and sport psychology, sport management, what else am I missing here? Feminist studies, youth development, child development. So it will speak to many, if not all of you here in the room today. And she's a prolific writer. She's also co-produced 2 documentaries. She conducts countless workshops and trainings across the country. And with that, I will stop, serves on lots of national boards, and just say that we are really thrilled to have you. I hope you will all help me welcome Nicole to RMU.
Thank you, Lauren, for that wonderful introduction. Thanks, Dean, for having me, and all of the sponsors in the room. I'm thrilled to be here. Good morning. And we're going to just dive right in. But before we do that, I want you to ask yourself this question. What do you think? Do you think 2015 was a tipping point for women's sport? We're just going to vote, and you have to vote. Either yes, it was, no, or I'm not sure. Okay? Yes, no, I'm not sure. So how many people say 2015 was a tipping point? Raise your hand. There's no right or wrong answer, so don't be like, what's the right answer? She's teeing me up here. All right, how about no? Okay, how about I'm not sure? Okay. All right, so we'll see how we vote at the end of the session today. I'm going to get my clicker, so this is going to be great. I'm going to do dual technology here. All right, so our game plan this morning is I'm first going to briefly tell you a little bit about the Tucker Center, what it is, what we do, and who we are. And then we'll talk about the tipping point. Have we reached a tipping point or not? And then we'll have a conversation. Lauren wanted me to leave some time for Q&A. So this will be kind of interactive and save your questions, and we'll have a little discussion at the end. Now, if you have a question and you didn't get to it, or you don't want to answer, you don't want to ask it because you're not comfortable doing that in a public setting, send it to me on Twitter. Okay, and I'll answer you at Dr. Sports Psych. It's a very clever handle, I know. All right, so just a little bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. Lauren was talking about my academic history, but I was a former tennis player. That's me as a youth athlete. I played tennis at Gustavus, and we were a fairly successful program. I had the pleasure of having tennis really be a formative influence in my life. And so then I became a coach. And as a coach, I coached at Wellesley College, and that's me down in the corner with my super stylish coaching gear in the 90s with my Oakley frogskin sunglasses, which I still have and are now back in style, to now being an academic. And as a coach, I really felt strongly about the best part of my job was developing young women. And at an all-women's college, I got a better sense of wanting to make a difference more than one team at a time. I felt a bigger calling to make a bigger difference or try to make a bigger difference on a bigger stage. And right about the time I was ready to get out of coaching, the Tucker Center opened up. So I went back to Minnesota, and I've been there 11 years now, postdoc. And as Lauren mentioned, the Tucker Center is the only research center of its kind in the world at a large land-grant research institution solely dedicated to the study of girls and women in sport. A lot of the things that we do outreach, we do products, we do lectures, we do community service, and we do research. And Lauren mentioned our 2 documentaries, one on female athletes and concussions, and one on media coverage and female athletes, which is one of our primary lines of research. And that one is the Emmy winner, a regional Emmy winner, which is proudly displayed in the Tucker Center. That was pretty exciting. But if you're interested and you want a hard copy for educational purposes, shoot me an email, send me your card, or give me your card and I'll make sure you get one. Or you can watch them both online free of charge. So that is a resource for you. And a lot of people across the country use these for teaching purposes. You can also find the Tucker Center on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, and Here's Proof is our grassroots social media campaign. One of the things that we do at the Tucker Center that we feel very strongly about as a researcher is I want to dispel false narratives about women's sport using the data. And there's a lot of false narratives out there around women's sport. And one of the ones we hear a lot pertaining to the media is nobody's interested in women's sport. And the media, well, we would cover it if people were interested. We only cover things that people are interested in. Well, the caveat there is that the media actually creates interest. So if you don't see anything, it's hard to be interested in it. So I'm a huge women's sports fan of all women's sports, and I sit in arenas a lot that look like this. This is our women's volleyball team, and they're pretty good. And I sat there and I go, man, you know, it's too bad nobody's interested in women's sports. And so this is data. This is actual data. So you can join us anytime you're at a women's sporting event and there's fans and there's interest. Take a picture, hashtag it, here's proof. Because this is proof, despite that narrative that's out there, that there are people interested in women's sport. Here's our hockey team, 3-time national champions, full house. They're playing the national championship last year. Here's the Lynx. Okay, the Minnesota Lynx, pretty good team as well, lots of fans. So here's the Women's World Cup. These are great data points for all of us to communicate to the media that there is a lot of interest in women's sport, and these amazing athletes deserve our attention. So hashtag here's proof, all right? So now let's get to our question of the day. Was 2015, and maybe a little bit before, a tipping point in women's sport? And so we'll start with a definition. A series of small changes that become significant enough to become a larger social change. Okay, so let's just 30 seconds, real quick, just shout out what maybe were some things in 2015 that happened in women's sport that I might be talking about today. We'll see, and you'll probably come up with some I didn't. So what do we have? The World Cup, okay? What else?
Serena Williams almost getting the Grand Slam.
Serena Williams, she was so close with the Grand Slam, but it created a lot of buzz. Okay, that was a big deal. What else? Oh, an MMA fan, perhaps. Ronda Rousey and Holly Holmes, right? Okay, that was huge. What else?
Women coaches in the NFL.
Yes. Women coaches in the NFL. Interesting. Okay, what else? Let's hear one more. Who's got a good one?
All the media campaigns like a Girl and Van Bossy.
Yes. Mainstream social media or marketing campaigns. And one more in the back.
The first professional paid women's hockey league.
Yes, right out of Boston, correct?
There's a team there, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Danny Ryland. Okay, one more.
What's up, divas?
Say that again?
I live out of the United States, and I saw a show when I came here a few days ago called Total Divas.
Total
with,
Divas.
WWE women wrestlers.
Oh, yes. That's a different talk. Okay, so this is good. So it's good that we're all on the same page, that there were probably a lot of significant things that happened out there around women's sport that makes researchers like me or those of us that care about women's sport going, is there change afoot here? Is something happening? Is this a tipping point? So we're going to look at the data because I'm a researcher, so it doesn't really matter what I think. Let's look at let the data tell the story. And so that's what we try to do in the Tucker Center. Let the data tell the story. And so we're going to talk about three main buckets here, and you've mentioned all of them: media, corporate interest, women in sport leadership, and sport participation numbers, to see if we have reached a tipping point or not. So let's start with media coverage and corporate interest. So this is an infographic out of the Tucker Center around the Women's World Cup, and this is part of our Here's Proof campaign, that the Women's World Cup final eclipsed viewership of all the other major men's events that we hold so dear in our society today. MLB, NBA, Men's World Cup, Stanley Cup, that we had more viewers, eyeballs on the screens, watching the Women's World Cup this summer than these other men's events. So again, when people say nobody's interested in women's sports, you look at the viewership data and that's just not true. And of course, my students who are really astute, when they looked at this infographic, they said, yeah, Dr. LaVoi, but the Super Bowl's not on there. I said, okay, fair enough. I don't think anything can compare to the Super Bowl, which is coming up. Where are my Broncos fans? Where are my Panthers fans? How many people are like, I'm not watching the Super Bowl? Okay, fair enough. All right. So Rousey, okay, Ronda Rousey, huge. If you watch the fight, which I did because I find the MMA very intriguing as a feminist sports scholar, which I won't get into now why I think that way. But UFC 193, Rousey versus Holmes, set all kinds of records. And Dana White, who's a masterful businessman, said, we set a lot of records in pay-per-view buys, live attendance in the arena. It was the first time that ever two female fights had led the fight card, and they knocked it out of the park. And if you watch MMA, this is a very male-based, male-dominated sport. So this was a groundbreaker. Dana mentioned there are a number of campaigns across the country, like a girl campaign. And how many of you seen that video where they asked the girls to throw like a girl, and they're throwing strong and running strong, and then they asked the boy to do it, and he's like, ah. And then they kind of questioned him on that, and he's like, well, then he kind of felt bad. And if you haven't seen the video, it's really powerful, and it really resonated, and the people behind this ad look for something round two in this because they kind of hit a chord, and there'll be more along the lines of this marketing campaign. And then we had Under Armour, I Will What I Want, with Misty Copeland, who was the first African-American ballet performer, and Under Armour has now really capitalized on the women's market. So what's interesting to me about this is now being a female athlete has brand cachet, that people are coming to the marketplace to market to former female athletes and to capture that space. And nobody's doing that better, in my opinion. And full disclosure, I do serve on the ESPNW advisory board. I want that to be clear. But, you know, despite the critics of ESPN and their coverage of women's sport, it could be more. But when they do cover women's sport, March Madness, the College Women's World Series, volleyball, the Women's World Cup this summer, they do it really well. And that's important, because if ESPN, who's the worldwide leader in sports, doesn't cover women's sports well, we have no chance. And ESPNW is a brand extension of the mothership, And it's only digital right now, but they're going into radio and podcasts. And if you haven't been on their website, they're relaunching it again, I think this week. They're rebranding it. And Laura Gentili, who's the VP of the W, is amazing. And if you want content, it's not just about women's sports. It's to serve female fans of sport. So a lot of people go, well, it's just about women's sport, and they've ghettoized it, and et cetera. But the purpose of it is to serve the female fan of sport. That's a little different. So these three, if you know Kate Fagan, who's this gal here, Jane McManus and Sarah Spain, they now have their own radio shows. So we're going to purely digital now, moving into space, and you will start seeing the W across the ESPN platforms if you look for it. So this is a really good move. ESPNW and the sponsorships, now the people that want to find the female fans of sport are now coming to the W in droves to be sponsors that are aligned with this brand. And one of the things is Marvel Comics. I don't know if you've seen this, but they worked recently with Marvel Comics to design a whole series of really powerful female action heroes across all different sports that you can download. And this is one about the female referee. So I think all of us who love women's sport should be rooting for the W, because if they don't succeed at doing this, nobody will. And so I think in the 5 years that they've been in the space, they've done an amazing job. All right, some other things in the media. Those of you who read sport media and you look at Sports Illustrated and ESPN, the magazine, you might notice that recently they've had a couple key females on the covers. Monet Davis, this was actually 2014. Ronda Rousey was named the toughest, I think it's the world's most dominant athlete this year, 2015. Not female athlete, which is what they normally do, the most dominant athlete in the world. That's pretty cool. And then we had Serena on the cover recently, named the Sports Person of the Year, the first African American, and one of the only women to ever been named that. So these are significant things, because if you know the data on the covers of when women get to be on the cover, it's not very often. And so when we do see women, that's a positive thing. All right, now, so that's the good news. The bad news is that women only appear on those covers 2 to 4% of the time. So out of all the sport media coverage, they only get 2 to 4%. That's disproportionate to their participation rates. And a lot of the data by our colleagues in sports sociology, Cheryl Cookie and Mike Messner and Margaret Carlisle Duncan, over the last 20 years have documented this. And in fact, the most recent statistic was on ESPN Sports Center. Women's sport got 1.6% of all the coverage on ESPN Sports Center. So while we have all these good things happening, we also have some work to do. And a lot of people, how many people were aware of this statistic? Okay, a lot of times when I put that up there, people are like, you're kidding. It's that low? And what's more interesting, that it's gone down. It used to be higher, and it's gone down in the last. So we have record numbers of girls and women playing sport, and we have a near all-time low of media coverage, which, as sociologists, we like, what is going on there? All right, and when women are portrayed, when they get that 2 to 4%, they are more likely to be portrayed out of uniform, off the court, and not in action. This is Alex Morgan, pretty good soccer player, world champion, versus this kind of image. This is how we code it: in uniform, on the court, in action. This communicates a much different message than the other image that I showed you first. So we know from the data that when women are portrayed, that 2 to 4%, most of the images are feminized, sexualized images instead of the primary focus on athleticism, which sends a very different message to young girls and women that, hey, your body, it's more important what it looks like than what it can do. And that's very dangerous, because we know from the APA in terms of the sexualization of women in general, girls and women in general, that this can lead to a host of internalizing disorders, anxiety, body image, anxiety, sexual dysfunction, etc. So this has real consequences when the very women who could be active, amazing role models are often portrayed in sexy ways. We have a lot of work to do, and that's one of the primary objectives of the Tucker Center. Now, in the sport media, again, some examples of when women are on the cover of these magazines. You can see it's, you know, they're hot, they're pretty, they're sexy. Sharapova, Danica Patrick, and I forget this gal's name, but she is an Olympic, I don't even know what that, hammer throw, is that what that is? The ball? Do you guys, where are my track people? Is that the hammer? Okay, good, all right. I'm a tennis player, you know, okay. So, but, you know, the ESPN then, I mean, talk about, okay, well, she's in action, but she has no uniform, and she is on the throwing circle. So she got 2 out of the 3, so I guess that should be good, right? And then we've got the swimsuit issue, and then we've got Serena. So if you start looking for patterns of women on these covers, you'll start seeing this quite clearly. Out of uniform, not in action, not on the field. And I always get the question, yes, Dr. LaVoi, but male athletes are sexualized too. True, okay? But proportionally, if you took 1,000 images of male athletes, there would be a small section of the sexualized images of males, where if you took 1,000 images of female athletes, proportionally, it wouldn't even be close. So I'm not saying male athletes aren't sexualized, but it means something very different culturally. All right, so we've done media. Let's get to women in positions of power. Some of you mentioned different women in positions of power. We have our first female Major League Baseball Players Union leader. We have Jen Welter in the Cardinals, who is an intern. We've got Becky Hammon in the WNBA. We've got Emily Marismo in men's tennis, coaching Andy Murray. We've got Jessica Mendoza, who is now the first female commentator of Major League Baseball, who got skewered by the trolls out there in the sport media saying she's a woman, she's never played baseball. What could she possibly know about baseball? And then she just hit it out of the park, and she was so good that she silenced her critics. She's amazing. And our first female referee in the NFL, and recently the first female assistant coach in the NFL for the Buffalo Bills, the first full-time. So this is in 1 year, even though Becky Hammon technically was late 2014. We'll count her. These are some major things, and I get calls by the media all the time. What does this mean? Does it mean the floodgates are going to open for women in positions of power? And I always say, I'm cautiously optimistic, but time will tell. We don't know if these women are one-offs or if this actually is a pattern of opening positions of power for women in sport, because the data is pretty grim. So we know from the media, and those of you that follow women in coaching, it's not too hard to find headlines about where are the women coaches. They've declined. Where are they? Pat Griffin, our colleague, who's now retired from UMass Amherst and a longtime LGBT advocate in sport, called there is now a college athletics war on women coaches. And that's pretty powerful words, and I have to agree with her, so I will credit her for saying it first. But this is one of my primary lines of research, and something I feel very passionately about, and I sit on the board of the Alliance of Women Coaches, because we know that after Title IX, almost every other industry, the amount of women is going up, not dramatically, but it is going in the right direction, and the amount of women coaches has gone the opposite direction. So 90% of women used to be coached by women. I know this graph is small, but on the left side here, Title IX, 90+% of women were coached by women, and now it's around 40%. Whereas 100% of male athletes get coached by men. Now, I'm not saying men shouldn't coach women. There are many awesome male coaches. What I'm saying is that we need gender diversity in the workplace. and that young women deserve to have female role models as coaches. And young men probably would also benefit from having female role models as coaches. So we can see that data here. This is from colleagues at Cost and Carpenter who are pioneers and legends. And you can see here, though, in the last 10 years, this number has leveled off. So we often hear about this historic decline, which is very evident, but in the last 10 years, it's leveled off. And I'm going to show you some data. So we think about a tipping point. That last little tick there looks like it's going up. So maybe we're going back up again. So this is one of the things we do in the Tucker Center. We do a College Women in Coaching report card. I'm just going to check my time here. Where we give grades to institutions A through F based on the number of women, head coaches, coaching women. And we started with the big FBS Division I, the 86 biggest of the Big East, Big 10, Pac-12. And we looked at their coaching staffs and we gave them a grade. And the minute that report came out 4 years ago, we're the 4th annual, we just released the 4th one on Monday. These are all available online, tuckercenter.org, and we have mid-major data and some D3 data as well. Within 5 minutes of that first report card coming out, I got a call from an AD of a school that had an F. This is exactly what I want to happen. Because the purpose of the report card is to create awareness, stimulate dialogue around this issue that we need more women coaches, and to create change. And there's no better way than a report card to get athletic directors' attention, especially schools like Duke and Stanford and schools that hold them, Notre Dame, I used to work there, hold themselves in high esteem. They don't like getting D's in anything. And I'm like, well, if you don't like it, then hire women. It's that simple. And we can talk about that later. But I got a call from this AD, and she was arguing with me. This was an SWA, so I'm not giving away, because if I said she as an AD at this level, there aren't that many of them, so you could be like, well, it's one of 4. So this was an SWA at the school. And she said, well, you know, we got an F, and we really should be a D because of this, that, and the way you coded the data. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, as a researcher, did I get the data wrong? So I pulled it up, I have it right in front of me. I'm like, well, I can see your point, but, you know, co-head coaches, one's male, one's female, counts as 2. She goes, well, that male really is a volunteer head coach. I go, well, that's not what it says on your website. So if we would have pulled him out, they would have been a D, but they were an F. And I thought to myself when I hung up, and I thought, now, isn't that ironic? That an AD was calling me to argue to be a D? And I'm like, yes, that's what I want. I haven't got any calls yet, but I usually do. And what's happening is now in the 4th year, we are starting to get calls and requests from athletic directors to say, you know, you're giving us this grade, meaning you're judging me, and I don't like it. Help me. We want to hire women. Let's have a dialogue. I'm like, that's exactly what we want. So we see over the 4 years of this report card, and this is just D1, FBS, big of the big time college athletics, that over the last 4 years, the last 3 years, we've ticked up a little tiny bit. And this year we almost went up 1%, 0.9% from last year. So maybe, tipping point, we're moving in the right direction. It's a little early to tell, but I'm hopeful that some of these awareness issues that we're doing is starting to make a difference. And I can tell you anecdotally, when search committees are being formed at these institutions and people are sitting in the room, the report card comes up. I've had probably 10 or 12 people tell me, we're sitting in our search committee and someone says, well, you know, there's that report card. And I had a trustee at one of the schools say, yep, we're aware of the report card, and guess what? We hired a woman. I go, okay, good. That's what we want. When we talk about women of color in the coaching ranks, the data's even worse. This is a little outdated now, but it's actually gone down. So much so that the NCAA passed a resolution a couple weeks ago with an initiative to target hiring women of color in coaching positions. So there's going to be a lot of resources and money now coming from the NCAA to help us recruit and retain women of color in the coaching profession. All right, so we talked about coaches. We talked about media. So when we think about other women in positions of power, who is deciding what goes on the cover and what they're going to write about? And when people say no one's interested in women's sport, and 90% of those people saying that are male, what they're really saying is they're not interested in women's sport. Now, I'm not saying all men are not interested in women's sport. That would be a terrible generalization. But when you look at the data in terms of who's the sports editors and assistant editors and sport reporters and columnists, there aren't many Christine Brennans out there who writes a sport column for USA Today every Tuesday. So that matters. So that data hasn't changed very much, and in fact, that's also gone down. Okay, let's talk about athletic directors at the Division I level. FBS again. This is Beth Getz. Out of the FBS, 7 of 25, which is less than 6%, are women. Now, this data was in 2014 by Rich Lapchuk and his colleagues at the Tide Center, the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport at University of Central Florida. They have a race and gender report card, and they look at this. 2014, it was 7 out of 25. To my knowledge, today it's still the same. We lost Julie Herman at Rutgers, but Beth Getz is now our interim AD at Minnesota because Norwood Teague acted inappropriately and got fired. So Beth is there. She's awesome, and I'm hoping she will stick around. But again, women in positions of power in 2016, they're very few. There's a few more at D2 and D3, but not many. And so when we see women in positions of power in coaching, in sport media, in athletic directors, this matters. And despite your political leanings, this is not a political endorsement of Hillary Clinton, but I think this quote from Terry O'Neill, who's the president of NOW, I'll read it to you in case you can't see it. Secretary Clinton's candidacy for the presidency is a powerful message to girls that they can aspire to the highest office. And equally powerful message to boys that women can be leaders on an equal footing with men. That's a transformative milestone in our society that's long overdue. And I cannot agree more. So what's true for our president is also true for athletic directors, sport media, and coaches. When we see women in positions of power, it challenges gender stereotypes, it provides gender equity in the workplace, it helps change, it helps social change. All right, last bullet, participation opportunity. The dean mentioned that due to Title IX, we have record numbers of girls participating in sport. And in fact, of all the athletes at every level, 43% are female. So it's not 50, but 43 is pretty good. However, that's half full. But if you look at the gap between, while we have record numbers of girls playing, we also have record numbers of boys. So that top line is boys and the bottom line is girls. This is data from the National Federation of High School. And you can see, this is one of the other false narratives we try to dispel with data when people say Title IX has hurt men's sport. If that were true, those lines would have crossed. And in fact, we have record numbers of boys and men playing sport too. So while some sports have been hurt, and not because of Title IX, it's because of decision makers of athletic directors, which we already talked about who that is that there's a gap. And when I'm a researcher and I look at this gap, it's not coming together. Those lines are not converging. So that was high school, this is college. So yes, we have record numbers of girls playing, but boys still outnumber girls at every level. So there's a gender participation gap. And the reason why this matters in terms of scholarship opportunities, resources, participation, is that we know, and the dean teed it up for me, is that when girls and women get to play sports, it leads to a host of psychosocial, health, physical, academic, and career benefits. And one of the most interesting things is a new study that came out in the last year by Ernst & Young and ESPNW, is that they interviewed 400 women in the C-suite across the, I think it was 4 countries, C-suite, CFO, CEO, CIO, high-powered women in big companies, and 94% of them say they played sport. I don't think that's coincidental. That's a pretty staggering statistic. So when women and girls are denied opportunity to play sport or don't get equal resources or coaching or funding or scholarships, this has economic impact. When women get to play sport, they also succeed in the marketplace. Betsy Stevenson had a really cool economic study a couple years ago that said, if girls play high school sports, they are more likely to achieve in high-paying careers in the science and the STEM fields and business. So not only do we have the psychosocial and health benefits and all the things that we kind of intuitively know about sport, it also helps us in our careers and to succeed in the marketplace, and that matters. So my question then, or our thought here, is depending on how you look at the data and what data you're looking at, either the glass is half full or it's half empty. And some days I'm wondering, which is it? Is there a tipping point or not? And so I will leave us to discuss that now and see what you think. So let's revote, okay? We're going to revote, yes, no, or I'm still not sure. Or maybe I was sure and now I'm not. So how many say 2015 was a tipping point? Yes. Okay, still a couple optimists out there. How about no? It was not a tipping point. And how about, yeah, I'm still kind of unsure. Okay. So the biggest thing is we had a lot more yeses the first time. So evidently I've thoroughly depressed you. Who invited her for breakfast this morning? All right, so I'm gonna stop there and let's just open it up for questions. Looking at my watch here. Yeah. It does not. However, the report card, does it take salary data into? No, but we do have some data on schools that are not private. So if you want to get salary data from, say, Northwestern, you're not getting it. I've tried. One of the things we do here in terms of women in coaching is that there is a salary gap, and that is true. And it's true between coaches of women's teams and coaches of men's teams. So it's not necessarily women coaches and men coaches, but men's football and basketball skews that so drastically that it's hard to kind of balance that out, because if you're Nick Saban and you're making X million dollars, I don't even know what it's up to now, and the women's basketball coach is making $300,000, it's hard to balance that out. But we are starting to look at that. And I have one poster on our website about economic inequality in the coaching on our website if you want to check that out. It's a good question.
This is more a statement than a question. The reason that I think it's no.
Okay. Yep.
And before I entered higher education, I was in sports journalism, so I confess.
Okay, you're one of those. Hiding in the back, ready to go for the door.
I think, sadly, the media are very inclined to sort of chase what is the next thing.
Yep.
And for a while, it was that whole outdoor X Games, people flipping around on whatever they're flipping around on that I could never do. And what I fear, if that's the right word, is that all the excitement that generated from the Women's World Cup team in 2015 is largely going to just sort of fade away. Mm-hmm. And there'll be the next thing, especially with this being an Olympic year, there'll be the next thing.
Yeah.
So my point is, and again, maybe there's a question in there, is why is there not staying power? You know, why can't the Women's World Cup team, even after it disbands, and moves on to other things, why does it not stay together? And I think part of the answer is, sadly, the media chase what is the next financial opportunity.
Yep.
And I'm not sure they see the Women's World Cup team as a financial opportunity.
I agree with that, and it usually goes back to money. And what's starting to change, though, and this is making me feel a little optimistic because of what I was telling you about ESPN and the W, is that now the business case is being made for covering women's sport. Look, I've sat in on a lot of meetings. ESPN is not covering women's sport because it's the right thing to do. They're covering it because there are fans, they are making money, and they're drawing different people to their brand than when they cover women's sport versus, you know, the 132nd baseball game, okay? So I think, and I'm hoping the media will follow, is that when we cover women's sport, it brings a different set of people to the marketplace. And one thing that you can all do if you care about this that does make a difference, because I talk to sports editors, click on the stories that cover women's sport. Click, share, post, tweet, retweet, share it, because that tells them people are interested. It drives traffic, and it does matter. So we all have a responsibility to do that. And that's one way that we can make a difference. That's a good question. Let's go in the middle, and then we'll come back here.
Jumping off of his question regarding it being an Olympic year, what kind of research or studies do you do following the female athletes in the Olympics, since we see it every 2 years with winter and summer,
Right.
but 2012 being, you know, the U.S. women's team won more medals than the U.S. men's team overall. So what kind of research or findings do you have with the Olympics specifically?
Yeah, I don't do that data, but some colleagues of mine do, and even in an Olympic year, the proportion of coverage remains about the same. So you think there'd be a spike, but it's not. And that's kind of troubling, because you would think the Olympics are kind of about equality and things like that, but they're not. The good news about the Olympic coverage is we do get to see different kinds of female athletes that we normally don't get to see. Now, who we don't get to see are like power lifters. We only see, you know, this summer we'll see track and field, and we'll see the runners and sprinters, but we won't see the hammer throwers and the power lifters. And so we only see a certain kind of female athlete portrayed when we do see them, and that's also problematic, because not everybody looks like the Maria Sharapova, right? So that reinforces that notion of what bodies matter, who matters, and who doesn't. But unfortunately, in Olympic year, it's really not that much different. A lot of people looked at it. Not me, but others. Over here, yep.
Going back to the report card, what is the future plan for it? Is the plan to go down through the mid-majors and cover Division I fully, then move to Division II and Division III? Is it hopeful that you will have a report card for every institution?
Okay, the question was, are you going to expand the scope of the report card? And we're trying. It's very labor intensive, and if I had unlimited student workforce, I would do it. But you also want to do it well, because if you're giving someone an F, you better be 100% right that that's what the data says. So right now we do FBS every year. We did mid-majors this fall, so not all of them, but Sunbelt, Mountain West, Conference USA, and forget the fourth one. We haven't done any Division II, and we're about to release a Division III report card. So we try to get a smattering. It's not going to be every conference, because we just don't have the bandwidth, unless somebody wants to give us a lot of funding to do the report card. But I do get a lot of questions. What about this conference? What about I'm like, get online. You can count it yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0, or 1, and then give yourself a grade. It's not, you know, the methodology is spelled out pretty clearly. So I think it's good that people are asking, what about my conference? What about my institution? And that's good. And I would have all of us join in to get that data and put it out there, because it's pretty easy to get, just takes some time. Good question. How about this side?
Have you done any correlation in terms of either employment or positions with minorities, and are they tracking at the same rate? And is it going to be a cyclical thing like we saw in the NFL, where there's a big push to hire, and then 5 years later there's one or two, African American head coaches?
Yeah, when the Rooney Rule got implemented in the NFL, and for those that aren't familiar, the Rooney Rule made it a policy in the NFL when there was any open position in the coaching staff, particularly head coaches, you had to interview a minority candidate, which did result in quite a big spike in the amount of African American male head coaches in the NFL. It has trickled off since then. But the good thing about the Rooney Rule is that it did make a difference. And I've been pushing, and I'll continue to push, that we need, and it would probably have to be the NCAA, which is a different issue, to implement unilaterally that when any coaching position is open, you must interview a female or minority candidate. And I would even, and this might be, you heard it here first, even for the men's openings. Because there are some women that coach men at the collegiate level. There aren't many, it's only about 2%. But if we're going to have more women coaching, they have to be at the table. Not that you're gonna hire them, but they at least get an interview. And I do think, I'm hoping we can keep working with athletic directors and conference commissioners in the NCAA to get that passed, but I think we're a few years away from that. I want to be 10 to time, so Lauren, how are we doing?
Yeah, we can take
a couple more. Any other? Can go way off the rails if you want.
How does this affect youth sport and the coaching of girls at the youth sport level?
Well, I didn't show you that data, but I have it. I could have thrown a lot more slides in here. But what we see from the college level to the high school level to the youth level is that we actually have fewer female coaches at the youth level than we do in college. And that's actually where I started this line of research, is if we want more women coaching, the youth level is the biggest part of the pyramid. We need more women coaching youth, so boys and girls grow up with female coaches, and then more women would go through the coaching pipeline. And what we find is that there's fewer. There's about 20% in youth soccer, and I just got back from the NSSCAA conference in Baltimore, and in a room like this, there were maybe 3 women. It's not good. So it's kind of counterintuitive. You think there'd be more, but there's actually less, and that's too bad, because a lot of young women today, and maybe some of you in the room, grow up in your entire sport career and never have one female coach. Not one. Where men, male athletes, 100% of the time get a male coach, which is good, okay? So we've got some room there. And we've done a little bit of research about mothers and coaching and how do we get them involved. And we have some stuff on our website about that. Good question. There was one in the middle. Yep, in the back.
How do you feel about women using their sexuality to promote their sport?
Well, I get that question a lot because let's think of Serena on the cover, right? This perfect case study. Sports Illustrated kind of took a sidestep around positioning her on the cover as kind of the diva on the throne because they said, well, that's what she wanted. Okay, fair enough. We don't want to strip agency away from female athletes. You can have a choice. However, here's the critical piece here. From our data at the Tucker Center, what we found is sex sells. Okay, it's pretty unequivocal that sex sells. We know that. However, our data shows that sex does not sell women's sport. In fact, you're going to tick off your core fan base. I'd put myself in that category. And dads with daughters find it very offensive. But the female athletes, like Serena, or those that look like the feminine norm that can be portrayed, like Lindsey Vonn or Maria Sharapova, they do it because they can make money. And why wouldn't you? it's an opportunity because they don't get paid a lot in the marketplace anyway. And the one way they can make a lot of money is through endorsements, and they sell their body. And it's an amazing body. So it might be good for that specific individual, but what we know is that does not generate interest in and respect for women's sport. So people don't watch Serena because, like, wow, she's a hot babe, right? They watch her because she's an amazing athlete. And so I say, female athletes, you're in a tough position because you can make a lot of money and you should capitalize on the small window you have. That's good for you, but it's not for the whole of women's sport. It's not good. And if those of you in the room that are looking for a career, here's one for you. You could do media training for female athletes. That is a wide open job. So I'll just give it to you because I have enough to do. Okay. All right, good question. One more, Lauren, or that's it? Okay. So thank you for having me. I'll be around all day, so grab me, and if you have other questions that we didn't get to or you want to ask me something, I'm happy to be here for you. So thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.